Good morning, good afternoon, maybe. Well, even good evening. I should say that because we record these episodes of the CDO Matters Live podcast. So if you're checking this out on YouTube's or wherever through Profisee.com later, it's not currently Friday morning, wherever you are. Happy day, happy evening, wherever you are. Let's not belabor that anymore. Time shifting, interesting. Hello, all. Happy Friday. It's Malcolm, host of CDO Matters podcast, here for our monthly installment of CDO Matters Live, where I talk about all things data strategy, all things data governance, all things master data management, which is going to be the topic for today. We'll let things settle out a little bit while people join online. Where's everybody calling from today? Where's everybody joining from? I've had a lot of people from Canada recently. Maybe the word is out that I'm a Canadian. Who knows? But wherever you're coming from, hope you're having a good day. Hope you will have a great weekend. I've had a great week so far. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you may have seen some posts. I was in Atlanta for most of the week. We had a kind of a company kickoff, the annual rah, let's get together. Our fiscal year ends at the end of January, which is a little odd. It's a little odd. So our year actually starts in February. So we get everybody together and we rah, but it's just a great time. It's just such a great time, especially for somebody like me who's based remotely. I'm here in my little beach house down in Florida. I'm away from the hustle and bustle of our headquarters location in Atlanta, and I don't get to spend a lot of time one-on-one with people because, not that I'm not in the office, which I'm not, but I'm just on the road so much. I'm in city after city after city, and it's tough to spend a week with quality time with coworkers. But I got a chance to do that this week, I should say, and that was just awesome. That was earlier in the week. While I was there, I had this major epiphany. And I've been having these ongoing epiphanies as they relate to artificial intelligence and AI. And it led me to call up a dear friend, Juan Cicada, to talk about my epiphany. It ended up being this impromptu podcast. Although we didn't record it, we probably should have, with myself and Juan and Tim Gaspar. So Juan and Tim host the Catalog and Cocktails podcast. If you haven't checked that out, you most certainly should check out Catalogs and Cocktails. Now, without getting too self-aggrandizing here, their number one episode last year, believe it or not, was their episode with me talking about little old MDM. Go figure. But I had this chat with Juan and Tim earlier in the week. It was about AI governance. I ended up calling them. They were both driving to Houston to go visit a client. So I got them on, while they were driving, had a good chat about it, because I'm kind of perplexed about AI governance. I mean, not on everything. It makes sense that we need to figure out ways to govern, for lack of a better word, how models are used, the behavior of AI models. Are they acting ethically? Are they avoiding bias and stereotypes and all those other things that we need AI to avoid doing? That to me that's the kind of the easy. I don't know if that's the right word to say that, but that's the most obvious when it comes to, I think, the governance of AI. How does it act? Does it produce, reasonable output? Does it act in a way that aligns with our goals and our values and our norms? Like that part I get. The part that I don't get and that I'm really kind of been struggling with is the data part, right? Like, we all know that data is used to create AI. And let's just loosely say models. There are other things that you could, like maybe a regression, natural language processing, whatever models. Let's just loosely say models. The data is used to create those models. But at least when it comes to generative AI and large language models or smaller language models or just any form of Gen AI, including like video, right? This thing that you've seen maybe this week with this amazing Sora. It's just incredible. The data used for those models, to create those models, is all text. It's all text. And for most companies that I work with over the last couple decades, that data is largely ungoverned. It's not governed. There may be some basic access controls on it, but doesn't follow the same governance paradigms that we would usually associate to data that lives in rows and columns. right? Like we're not doing data quality or data lineage on text blobs. We just don't. We don't. We're not validating and verifying the quality of data that is sitting bound up in text. So my head has a hard time getting around the idea of like the use of the word governance, because when I think governance, I think a certain thing. I think governance frameworks. I think data quality. I think all the things that we do as a part of a robust enterprise-wide data governance framework that we need to do. And when it comes to AI and how the data is used to train these models, it's text. And we're not doing any of that stuff to that data. So when I hear people talk about AI governance, and the data itself, it just makes me scratch my head, because it in many ways kind of seems like we're talking about putting diesel in a gasoline engine, meaning, well, we need to govern the data, but it's text, which is largely ungoverned at most organizations. So I wanted to make sure that I wasn't completely insane or losing my mind. So I called up Juan. He said, no, you're not losing your mind. Thank goodness. Although I may be, but I'm not completely losing my mind. So that was a really interesting conversation. I had a post on LinkedIn about that this week. I think this is something we should talk about in an entire episode of CDO Matters live, because I'd love to probe on this a little bit more, because I think there are lots of situations where we're talking about AI. We're talking about governing AI. We're talking about creating models, and we're talking about the data used to do all of these awesome, cool things. And the old world of how we've been doing this to rows and columns and managing data in rows and columns. Okay, they're not all rows and columns, but you get my point. Structured data, right? I like to use rows and columns because it's a kind of a pedestrian way of describing tables. But the way that we do governance and the way that we do data management and data quality and MDM and all that stuff against that data is not really relevant for data sitting in text that is being used to train all of these models. So I see a little bit of a divide there. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy, but I think it may be worth additional discussions. Jonathan from Atlanta. Nice to see you, Jonathan. Hinda from Canada. Yay! See, told you. I'm bringing out the Canadians. Where are you, Hinda, in Canada? I'm from Edmonton. Shelly in Geneva. Wow, that's awesome. Alexa in the ATL. Hello, Alexa. Nice to see you. Brandon, Omaha. Fantastic. I was just talking with somebody from Omaha earlier this week. One of our customers is from Omaha. I got to interview him at our annual event. Jennifer in the ATL, or in the ATX, I should say. Bite my tongue. I lived in Austin for 20 years. I think Austin is honestly like the greatest city in the United States. I'm just going to say it. I think Austin is the greatest city in the United States. If I'm 20 or if I'm 30 and I'm working in tech, that's where I'm going to be. Austin is awesome. I just happen to want to move to the beach because I'm getting old and I want to have my feet in the sand and I want sunshine. Yes, there's a ton of sunshine in Austin, but there's no beach. There's no beach. But I was in Austin 20 years. Great city. So glad you could make it. Hello, Desi from the great state of New Jersey. Phil in Northern Ireland. Nice to see you, Phil. Whereabouts in Northern Ireland? My grandfather is County Down, from County Down, which means that I actually have Irish citizenship, believe it or not. I have 3 passports, believe it or not. US, Canada, Ireland. Go figure. Well, there's Libby. Hello, Libby. Rodney, checking in from the Big Smoke, Toronto. Awesome. Oh, Hinda, you're in Toronto. That's cool. Christopher's just across the lake in Buffalo. That is fantastic. Michael in San Antonio, awfully close to Austin. Awfully close. I have a stepdaughter who's going to be going to school in San Marcos. Know San Antonio well. Awesome town. Michael, Westchester, New York. Sorry to hear it's raining and cold. Hello, Carla. Man, my eyes are getting so bad. Oh, Eric. Hey, see, again, another Canadian in Montreal. Bonjour, Eric. Ça va? Sima from another Toronto. This is awesome. I may be saying these names wrong because my eyes are becoming so bad. Yeah, Sima. Hello. Oh, well, Samuel and another Toronto. Armagh, County Armagh, one county across from County Down. That's fantastic. Hey, we may be related, Phil. You never know. We may be related. Michael. Where's Michael? Texas State alum bought cats. How about that, Texas State? Yeah, I love that part of the world. I love Austin. I love the Hill Country. I used to get out to in and around Fredericksburg a lot. For people in the US, like Austin is I would say it is a legit like long weekend destination. Like go take 4 or 5 days in Austin, particularly in January, February. It'll be a little brown. It's not entirely brown. But it's such a great place to go. Or March, maybe even if you can push it out to South by Southwest. Fantastic. Fantastic. All right, y'all. See, I'm Canadian. I said y'all because I lived in Texas 20 years. I'm allowed. I got the pass. When I lived there 20 years, they gave me the, hey, you can say y'all. And yes, I'm Irish too. Let's cut to the chase. Let's talk about my beloved master data management. And hey, folks, I'm honored that you're sharing where you're from. But if you have questions as well, please, please, please ask anything, anytime. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about MDM today, but you can ask a question about anything. Governance, strategy, AI, you name it. Anything that you think this ex-Gartner analyst could help you with, I'm game. Let's chat. But let's focus on MDM. So what do I mean by the state of MDM? Well, while I was still at Gartner in 2021, I was there 3 years. Talking to CDOs and CIOs about MDM, was given the honor of writing 3 MDM Magic Quadrant documents, not alone. I co-authored them with my friends, Sally Parker and Simon Walker, over those years. And as a part of probably one of the last major research pieces I did at Gartner was this document that I titled The State of MDM. So I'm kind of borrowing this from Gartner. I assume you can't really completely and totally copyright like that. That's a pretty generic phrase. Forgive me, Gartner lawyers, if it is. I don't think it is. Let's say the state of master data management, not the state of MDM. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. But I wrote this document in 2021, knowing that in 2022, the MDM Magic Quadrant would go away. The editorial staff, the editorial leadership at Gartner had made the decision that the Magic Quadrant for master data management, which had been a master quadrant for a long time, and a few different iterations. There was a product, there was a customer MDM, there were separate Magic Quadrants there, but it had existed for well over a decade, I think. And they made the decision to sunset the Magic Quadrant. Why, you ask? Well, the justification at Gartner was twofold. I'd say largely twofold, threefold. Was mostly that the way that kind of Gartner looks at the world of software is through that hype cycle. So you may know the hype cycle, right? Things go up the hype cycle and then they go down. So it's up, top of the hype cycle. The bottom is this thing called the trough of disillusionment. And then software will naturally evolve into what's called the plateau of productivity. I love these catchy phrases. So where MDM is on that is towards plateau of productivity. So Gartner's perspective was, hey, MDM has gone through the hype cycle. It survived. It is now a well-established part of any data management ecosystem. It's reached market maturity is a good way to say it. And when software reaches market maturity, Gartner says, well, we don't really kind of need to have the hype cycle in the Magic Quadrant because it's just standard operating procedure now. So the decision, so that was kind of like one driver. Another driver here is that Gartner was kind of seeing things slowly evolve in the MDM market. Now, I kind of disagree with this, although I was one of many voices that was making these decisions at Gartner. But Gartner was kind of seeing things in MDM evolve towards what they call more of a data and analytics governance platform. So in tandem with the sunset of the Magic Quadrant, they started publishing what's called a market guide, which is what they do when things are at the very beginning of that hype cycle. So when something is at the very beginning of the hype cycle, when they're just starting to cover, they're just starting to become aware of something, they start these market guides. And the market guide was for what they called and I was a co-author in this as well, which is a data and analytics governance platform, which was really loosely defined and remains really loosely defined. But the first version of this had over 120 vendors that kind of qualified. I mean, so it just like they cast out this wide net, and MDM providers got caught in it, data quality providers, data integration providers. I mean, you name it. Basically, if you're doing anything data, you would kind of qualify for this market guide. And the expectation was is that over time the market would kind of solidify, that over time it would gain clarity, over time that it would become more obvious of what this was. But to make a long story short, Gartner, I think, is wrestling. And this is evident to this day. And I'm not speaking for Gartner. I'm not speaking for them. This is my personal opinion. But I think they're trying to figure out where the market is going in the data management space. And there's really kind of two forces here. There's the forces towards kind of best of breed, which is very much what Profisee is. And there's a few others, like Calibra would be an example of a best of breed data governance, data catalog platform, and maybe an Elation. But there are best of breed providers out there that sell standalone solutions that do MDM, that do data quality, that do data governance. That's one force of the market. And there's another force in the market of suites, not candy, but like suites, groupings of software, like platforms, maybe. I hate to use the word platform in this regard, but where they are suites, kind of Swiss Army knives, maybe, of solutions that do everything and do a little bit of everything. They do a little data integration, they do a little data quality. And some of the mega vendors like the Informaticas of the world, the SAPs of the world, arguably even the Oracles of the world have these suites, and they will sell you, all of them or some of them. And increasingly often you can't buy those pieces individually. Like an IBM, you can't buy MDM from IBM anymore. You can't. You have to buy their whole thing. Their kind of their suite of solutions. So there's those two opposing forces, best of breed, suites, and Gartner was starting to see things lean more towards these suites of solutions. And I'm not sure I entirely agree. I think both can coexist, and I think both should coexist, because if I'm an IT buyer, do I want to go all in and lock myself into a single provider for integration, for quality, for MDM, for BI, for analytics, for everything? I'm not so sure I do. Although I see certain attraction there. I see certain value there, especially when we start having conversations related to the data fabric, which is not the topic of today. But I think that there are economies of scale that are interesting there. But to make a long story short, Gartner kind of saw things going that direction towards the suite of providers, where MDM arguably becomes more of an enabling capability, where it's not its own thing, but it's this idea of more of an enabling capability. And I think, I'm not speaking for Gartner again, but I think that's where they kind of see the market partially going. It is certainly going that way, but the best of breed providers are not going away either, because there are a ton of reasons why you would want a best of breed provider. Speed to deploy, time to value, right? Avoidance of vendor lock-in. In many ways, cost and price, lower price, right? Because a lot of those big providers, they can charge a premium. They get you into like minimum commitments a year, right? And maybe you don't want that. So there is a little bit of a, let's call it a schism when it comes to the state of MDM. And this is kind of like the overall kind of overarching, this is my view of the market today. But to back up a little bit, so there remains no magic quadrant. I co-authored the last one for MDM. There remains no magic quadrant. There are this market guide for data and analytics governance platforms. So because of that, I'm writing this white paper. We'll publish it probably in the next couple of weeks. This is the first time I'm kind of talking about it, but I'm going to publish a white paper, call it the state of MDM, where I'm going to go into depth in the market and MDM market, because I think we need a magic quadrant and we don't have one. So I'm going to go into depth, and I'm going to provide my overview. It will be through a market-wide perspective. I will share my insights of the various providers that are in the space, the strengths, the minuses, strengths, weaknesses, you name it. We'll talk high level about a few of those today. So let me go back. If anybody else has said hi. All right. No, that's cool. Checking the Q&A. This is my chance to actually take a breath, have some coffee. So the state of MDM, that's the precursor. I think there's a need for some form of a magic quadrant. It doesn't exist, so I'm going to create one. Pardon me. You can tell it's a live event because I'm sneezing. And I'm not AI. This is not Sora. This is the real deal here. um, so let's start high level. Is MDM dead? Absolutely not. And not just because it's near and dear to my heart, but because of market forces. So, I mean, there are so many tailwinds pushing MDM along, and I would argue make it as relevant as it's ever been. In that last document I published at Gartner, I had the phrase where I said MDM had transitioned from a nice to have to a must have. I said that in 2021, and I believe it more than ever now here. There's a few reasons for that. One is digital transformations that started in 2020, 2021. Companies figured out that, hey, these disruptions are becoming the new normal, right? Whether it is a global pandemic, fingers crossed that never happens again. Maybe it's a supply chain shock. Maybe it's war in Europe. Like you name it. Like there's a whole bunch of things that are happening now. These disruptions seem to become, and maybe weather related, for heaven's sakes. These disruptions are happening more and more and more, and we need to be able to respond quickly to market changes. We need to be able to respond quickly to changing customer behaviors or supply chain disruptions or whatever it is, or wars in Europe or whatever it is. We can no longer be caught flat-footed as a business. The way to do that is to make sure that you have your data house in order, that you have particularly the data that matters most, the data that exists between functions within your organization, that it is well structured, well mastered, well governed. That data, the master data, is sound, right? And if you push the gas pedal for your organization and you say, well, we need to completely change our supply chain, how are you going to do that if you don't have a consistent view of your suppliers across your organization? How are you going to build customer intimacy if you can't build a report that gives you a complete and total view of your relationship with a given customer, whether that is a consumer or whether that is a business? You can't. These are things we've always known, right? We've always known as MDM people and MDM providers and data people. But companies kind of figured that out in 20 and 21 and 22, I would argue, and started to invest in digital transformation, which included MDM as a core component of those digital transformations. Yes, sometimes companies were investing in like e-commerce sites. Maybe they were investing in new channels or new distribution channels. Maybe that even included an ERP consolidation, which is another force that's pushing MDM along. But to make a long story short, digital transformations have not stopped. Companies continue to invest in these things because they realize they cannot continue to be caught flat-footed during these disruptions. So that's one of the things that is pushing MDM along. I already mentioned another one, ERP consolidations. It just blows my mind how many companies are paying insane amounts of money to consolidate the 10, 15, 20, 30. I've heard of a company having over 70 instances of a single ERP provider. It's almost always SAP. But these companies are consolidating ERP, right? And it makes sense. I mean, I get it. Why would you have 70 instances of something if you don't need to have 70 instances of something, just from an IT perspective? That's pushing MDM along. So many manufacturing centric companies are investing in this. And again, it traces back to a lot of what happened in COVID. But a lot of these companies are finding, particularly those that are focused on SAP, when you go from legacy versions of SAP to S4HANA based versions of SAP, that is basically, from a data perspective, at least from a master data perspective, that's a greenfield exercise because the tables look completely different in those two instances of SAP. Legacy, you've got two tables, one for supplier, one for customer. In S4HANA, you've got one. It's a business partner table. And so there's data work that you have to do anyway, as a part of that migration. So a lot of companies are turning to MDM to act as a bridge, right? And a lot of them are actually investing in non-SAP based solutions to do that, to solve that specific problem. And how do I go from where I am to where I want to be? Hey, by the way, I need to maybe even clean up some of this data. I need to kind of address some of the data debt we've been accumulating for decades. Great way to do that is within some standalone MDM solution that's sitting outside of SAP. That's another thing that is putting air in the MDM sails. Another thing, of course, guys, is AI. Can't not talk about AI. Now, I think there's a lot of nuance here because, again, traditionally, when you talk MDM, you're talking rows and columns, right? Is the data in an MDM hub going to be used to train an LLM? No, it won't. It won't be used to train an LLM. It won't even be used to fine tune an LLM. But I would argue 95 to 99% of you won't even be building LLMs because they're commoditized now. Why would you even be investing tens of millions of dollars to create your own language model? And they largely exist by the big providers, right? How that data will be used in the rows and columns in an MDM or any other analytics platforms, by that way. This is going to be a big topic of mine coming up at the next Gartner Summit in Orlando. I'm actually going to be giving a half-hour presentation with the CDO of Microsoft, where we're talking about this exact thing. How the data sitting in rows and columns in an MDM hub will be used to enable AI at scale. How do you do that? And how will that rows and columns data be used? It's going to be used in complex prompts that are being fed through intelligent agents, through chatbots, where what you're doing is in essence creating what can be maybe a fairly complex prompt where you are telling a chatbot, hey, I know these things to be true because I pulled them out of my MDM. These are the things that I know to be true about my customers. Now tell me something that I don't know. Or maybe I'm looking at a report and I'm talking to some sort of BI copilot. And hey, Copilot, tell me something about this data that I don't know. Summarize this data. Give me some useful insights about this data. And if the data that they're looking at is no bueno because it doesn't have master data because there's 15 versions of the same customer, you got a problem. So we need to get away from this idea of, oh, well, we need MDM to train things. No, we don't need MDM to train things. We need MDM to help make sure these copilots and these chatbots and everything have a source of truth that they can rely on. We're not going to be in the business of training LLMs. I think we can largely leave that. Maybe some companies will be building what's called a small language model, where instead of 70 billion parameters, maybe you have just a billion parameters, smaller models that are very domain centric. I can see that happening in the future, where maybe we find a way to make the jump between rows and columns and text. And the way you would probably do that is through vectors or graphs. Separate conversation, probably. What I'm trying to tell y'all here is that you do need to have a solid foundation of data. You need a solid foundation of master data to get value out of AI, because I would argue most of us are going to be using AI the most at scale through these copilots, through these chatbots. And we need to give them information that is accurate and that is correct. And if we don't, well, then you got an Air Canada. So I don't know how many people saw that this week. A chatbot for Air Canada gave some wrong information about a bereavement policy. And I think we're going to be seeing more and more of this, where a lot of the chatbots are kind of behaving strangely. But it's based on the data that they're consuming, right? And maybe that was in a vector, and maybe that data was incorrect, right? Anyway, yes, MDM will play a critical role in the enablement. Oh, thank you, Manesia. There's a question. Oh, from Phil. Hi, Phil. Aside from, anyway, that's my rant on AI. And I'm prone to rant, and there'll be more of that. Stay tuned. Aside from platform versus best of breed. Oh, did you finish your question, Phil? It just says, aside from platform versus best of breed, are the master data management, or is there more? Oh, read more. Sorry, I'm blind. And I'm resisting the fact that I need probably full-time glasses. I'm just resisting the fact because I'm vain. Yeah, sorry, Phil. Challenges mutating as a result of concepts such as data fabric mesh. Oh boy. Okay. Are mesh fabric concepts disrupting traditional supplier vendor relationships at the data tier? Let me read that again. Aside from platform versus best of breed, are master data management challenges mutating as a result of concepts such as data fabric, data mesh? No. Thinking. No. The discipline itself, well, no, but yes. Well, so let me answer. The discipline of master data management, the underlying business drivers, the needs for master data management as a discipline, as a process, those have not changed, right? What I believe, and this is pretty high level, But this may be a good way to describe this to business leaders or to executives. MDM exists in the spaces between functions, right? Sales, finance, right? Quote, cash, customer, customer. Exists customer data in both places, right? But is often represented completely different way. Another example would be maybe sell to, bill to, right? Customer data not jiving. We can't make any sense of it. But master data management exists to solve this problem. Master data management as a discipline exists to enable cross-domain, cross-function sharing of shared data assets. We need consistent definition, structure, hierarchy, quality standards. That's where MDM lives. It lives in those spaces, maybe right where my head is. That's not going away. And you can talk fabric, you can talk mesh, you can talk data products, you can talk whatever. AI, it doesn't matter. That need is not going away because businesses are functionally aligned. Maybe we can thank Henry Ford. I don't know, but that's just how organizations are structured. And business applications are structured that way. Salesforce, ERP, CRM, ERP, right? Those applications of the business processes are optimized at those levels for those functions. So the data necessarily is going to look slightly different, and that's okay. But to resolve the difference, if your CEO asks how many customers do we have, that's where things can get a little bit interesting. Because if the CEO asks, there's only one answer. There's only one answer, and you better be prepared to give one answer. And by the way, do not be that data practitioner who says, "Ooh, who's asking? Oh, it's the CEO." Well, sales says A and finance says B, and I'll leave it to them to figure it out. Don't be that data practitioner. You don't want to be that person. I've tried. It doesn't end well. So getting back to the question about mesh fabric, is that mutating or changing the definition of MDM? Well, let's take a data mesh. And I just spoke with Scott Hurlman this morning, who is the host of the Data Mesh Radio. I'm going to be a guest in the Data Mesh Radio, coming shortly to a neighborhood near you. I'll be honest, folks, I've been a bit of a mesh contrarian. I thought it was too complex. I thought it was over engineering. I don't see the ROI, right? The ROI exists as this thought experiment, I think. If you listen to previous versions of this live event or of my previous podcast, you'll hear me talk about the mesh. I'm not that much of a believer because I can't see the ROI. Like I centralized patterns of data management and data architectures exist for a reason. Just ask United Airlines or ask any network architect why hubs exist. MDM is a hub. So to your question, Phil, does the data mesh challenge the notion of MDM? No. It doesn't. It tried. I would argue that it tried. So a data mesh says full federation. MDM, any centralized patterns of managing data, right? Either from an architecture perspective or data management perspective, policy, or even systems. Any centralization is bad and should go away. Zhamak Dehghani, the author of Data Mesh, called MDM an anti-pattern. Well, a lot of people ran with that early on in the data mesh and said, okay, full federation, let's go, right? Like just go do your own thing, have the domains define your customer definitions. So that sales can have a customer definition, finance can have a customer definition, everybody gets a customer definition, knock yourself out. But then there were those data providers who were getting asked, how many customers do we have? Oh, I can't really answer that question because it's a cross-functional question. I mean, and you need to have both. So where MDM as a discipline is evolving, this is part of the state of MDM. MDM as a discipline is evolving as it necessarily needs to evolve. I try to avoid now saying a single version of the truth because it's just not really representative of how companies operate. Companies operate at three levels: functional, cross-functional, enterprise-wide. Three levels. Another way to look at this is maybe a three-ring Venn diagram. The middle of the Venn diagram, that's your master data. That is enterprise-wide. The rings on the Venn diagram that only cross two circles, well, that's cross-functional. The areas of the Venn diagram that don't overlap at all, that's functional. For those areas, knock yourself out. If you are managing data in Salesforce and there's 200 attributes on a customer record, 190 of them probably nobody cares about but sales and marketing. Do whatever you want to them. Govern them how you want to govern them. Call them what you want to call them. Have your own quality standards. It doesn't matter. They never leave Salesforce. They're just there. Now, marketers do certainly have a certain problem because they've got multiple systems even within their own domain. That aside, hopefully you get my point. If data is not being shared widely, well, who cares? Like, govern it yourself. Have full domain control over that. If it's cross-functional, all of a sudden, if it's at that middle tier or the top tier, now you're talking MDM for both as a discipline, and you need to be able to solve for it. So there can be a version of truth at the top, there can be a version of truth at the middle, and there could be a version of truth at the bottom. And a modern approach to MDM would be to acknowledge all three. This is part of the state of MDM. This is where we're going as MDM practitioners. This is what we need to embrace. Because if the CEO asks, you better be prepared to give one answer. That's the single version of the truth. There's also a version of the truth at the bottom of that pyramid. I represent it as a pyramid. Another way to say this is that the notion of truth is contextually bound. We've always known this to be true, right? We've always known this to be true. The notion of truth is contextually bound. And there are multiple contexts in an organization. I would argue there are three. And truth can exist differently at each of those levels. And we need to embrace that as MDM practitioners. That's what I would argue is more of an adaptive form of MDM. Gartner used the word adaptive to describe modern governance programs, adaptive governance, where you can have multiple rules, multiple quality standards that take into account that, there are different rules, different expectations, different processes, different governance happening at different levels of the organization. The problem is that's really hard. We have a hard enough time doing things just at one level, right? How many data governance committees have you all sat on where you argued about that single definition of customer? I've done it many times. So you get my point. It's hard. If you're trying to do a single version of the truth for everybody and you can't get everybody to agree, arguably at the bottom levels, it's a lot easier, but you got to be able to do all three. That's the question. Oh, questions are flooding in. Okay. Back with the goggles so I can actually read what you're asking. Oh, so good questions. How does AI, ML, LLM simplify, automate, semi-automate? And this is from Ketan. By the way, thank you, Ketan. Hopefully I'm saying your name correctly. Authoring, management, stewardship, standardization, master reference data. What a great question. So you can kind of think of AI when it comes to data management, including master data management. There's a spectrum. At one end of the spectrum, there is, let's just call it augmentation. And the other end of the spectrum, let's call it full automation, right? Augmentation is a place where humans are deciding, but machines are suggesting, right? At the other end of the spectrum, machines have completely taken over, Skynet stuff, right? I would argue that we're just at the beginning of augmentation, where AI can play a huge role in doing things like maybe recommending a master data model, for example, maybe recommending match rules, right? What attributes should you use to match customer records or product records? So there's a ton of opportunity for AI to augment traditional data management practices, even things like integration patterns, even things like what I saw this week or 2 weeks ago when I was at a Microsoft event in Denver, where I watched a co-pilot write an API. Like unbelievable. Like, and it did it pretty quickly. It said, here's where the prompt was basically, here's the source, here's the destination, write me an API. Like, wow. But where humans are still approving those things, right? Where the machines are not taking over here. Particularly since LLMs are involved, you do need to manage for hallucinations. You need to manage for quality. You need to make sure that what you're looking at is correct. And I wouldn't take that API and just drop it into production. No way, Jose. I test it, right? But like, this is kind of where we are. And when it comes to MDM, you'll see more and more and more augmentation of traditional things like data stewardship, like recommending things. We've got capabilities in Profisee right now that can take text blobs and automatically take data that is in text and inject it into specific fields on a master data record. So if I'm creating a new product record or a new customer record, and I've got maybe just a text description of a product, I can take that and feed it into an LLM and have that LLM actually inject it. The LLM takes it from text and actually exports JSON. The JSON is injected into a data model. within Profisee. It's pretty slick. I mean, so the possibilities here, I don't want to say are endless, but there's a lot of possibilities here, particularly stewardship and particularly data management, the configuration and management of MDM when it comes to data modeling. Hierarchies are another one. Writing graphs, putting ML on top of some sort of graph to recommend a hierarchy structure, that's another one. Using graph to actually augment match processes, that's another one that we're actually working on at Profisee. So there's a lot. In time, I think we'll see more and more move towards automation, away from augmentation, but there's a ton going on here. This is a great question, Ken. Thank you. Carlos, so do you think master data won't play a massive role within AI and specific for rags? Oh no, it will. That's kind of my point. Maybe I didn't make my point very clearly. When it comes to rag patterns, so it's a retrieval augmented generation, where as a part of a prompt, what a rag pattern is as a part of a prompt, you basically feed information to an LLM that is a known fact set, where you basically said, knowing these things to be true, and that rag could include a call to a vector database or to a graph to say, hey, take this data as known to be true and tell me something about it, or take action on it, or make recommendations on it. The data that is used in the rag, I assume, often will be coming from MDM. It should be coming from MDM. So I think MDM will play a huge role in that. My previous rant on that, Carla, was really about training, right? And we need to be careful about our words here. When it comes to the creation of LLMs, there's two processes that are really important, right? One is training, and the other is fine tuning, right? Where you train it to speak, and then where you fine tune it to make sure to start reducing false positives and hallucinations and errors. And you can fine tune open source LLMs like Bard, but you can't fine tune OpenAI, ChatGPT, because it's closed. It's a closed model. But in both of those situations, you're using text to do it. You're not using rows and columns. You're using text to both train and to fine tune a language model. So my point here is that training, fine tuning, separate world. Prompting is a different thing altogether. Prompting and RAG, I would kind of put RAG together with a complex prompt. That's how I just try to explain it to business executives. Sometimes I've heard this thing about RAG. What is this? And I just say it's a really complex prompt. In essence, in that case, MDM, absolutely. Or when you're giving data to a copilot to say, or like, hey, copilot, analyze this, or make a recommendation on this. Yeah, absolutely, MDM is going to be relevant. Absolutely relevant. Great questions, by the way. Ken, thanks for taking a quick. Can MDM, RDM adopt these technologies to eliminate the data stewardship efforts to repetitive tasks based on learning? Absolutely. That's a great use case. An example would be data steward changes Acme to Acme Inc. 2 times, 3 times, then the 4th and 5th and 6th and 7th times, they don't have to do it. Like you could build a model that said, okay, obviously, instead of having to do repetitive data stewardship tasks over and over again, you could easily build some form of reinforcement learning, where the reinforcement is the steward, and where the model just picks it up and says, okay, going forward, I'm just going to do it. Yes. Glasses. Hello, Garanga. How are you doing? It's going to be late in India. How are you going to use AI and master data management as AI now is driving? I hope I explained that. I think the easiest way will be in the short term through complex prompting, through copilots and chatbots. Hello, Melanie. IT and our cool tools can be an enabler. However, the business typically contributes to throw its ownership back to IT. Well, yeah. Well, what does ownership mean, Melanie? So I'm not a big fan of the word ownership. I mean, I get it. I mean, I know Dhamma, right? I know the wheel. I know what Dhamma says about ownership, but I think ownership is a little more complex. I assume you're talking about ownership of data, by the way. I'm making an assumption. But what does that mean? When I think about ownership of data, there are no fewer than 5 unique roles that I think could all make a claim to owning data. The traditional way that people consider ownership is either through the definition of governance policies or the enforcement of governance policies. Those can be 2 different people. by the way. You could define a governance policy that says, hey, this is what our customer data needs to look like. This is how wide the field is. This is how many characters the customer record can have. But you could actually have one person define that and you have somebody else actually enforce it. You could have somebody in the governance committee write the rule, but you could have somebody in sales actually enforce it, like somebody in sales operation. But then there's other people, like the people who are actually doing the work, like the salesperson. Do they own that data? What about the person who owns or manages the CRM system where the data is being implemented in? Does that person own the data? They own the system. Do they own the data? Right? What about the data that is being input? Maybe it's data about a person. Who's the sovereign of that data? Maybe I'm the lead on a customer record. Do I own that data? Even though somebody else is inputting it and there's a governance policy that somebody else created. My point being, when it comes to master data, data that is shared widely, Melanie, widely, where sales has a say, finance has a say, HR has a say, a whole bunch of people have a say, the concept of ownership is entirely murky across all of those aspects that I was talking about, particularly when it comes to governance policies. So if you are, let's say, a data steward in sales, and you try to tell somebody in marketing you own their data, good luck with that. I've tried. It doesn't work well. Not a great way to start a relationship with those people, because it has to be collaborative. It has to be collaborative. So, people don't like to hear, when it comes to master data, a lot of people don't like to hear me say, hey, ownership of data is inherently collaborative, but it has to be because it's shared. I don't know any other way. You can make somebody responsible for making sure that those policies are enforced. That part you can give to one person. But when it comes to defining the policies and aligning on the policies, that's awfully tough to ask one person to do. Great question, Melanie. Thank you. Good. Hope. Still, regardless. I think I may have answered a lot of the question. Hi, Garaga. Guess it's late. I'm glad you stayed up. Going back to the chat. Carla joining from NC. Oh, Dean shared an article. Oh, the Air Canada thing. Oh, more info on that. I'm going to have to check that out later, Dean. So when I saw the Air Canada thing, my first reaction to that, I don't know if everybody knows what the Air Canada thing is. Like it was all over the news. My first reaction to that, oh, well, the data must have been wrong. I'm not sure it was. Right? Maybe it was whoever built that chatbot. Was that a custom configured chatbot built by Air Canada? Because if the data in the bereavement policy online was correct, and that was the data that was being fed to the chatbot, and the chatbot still made stuff up, well, then that's probably a software engineering problem, not a data problem. Anyway, my point being, I think we were pointing fingers a little early. I was at least, because I assumed the problem was the data, but who knows? All right, I want to make sure that I get to all the questions. Getting some great questions, by the way. Thank you, Carla, for your question. Hopefully I answered your question, Garaga. Always nice to see you. Melanie, I hope I answered your question as well. But yes, IT doesn't want to own data. They don't want to manage data. No, they don't. Or I should say the business. And they push things. Yes. Yeah, they do. In one way, it's job security. Okay, I think I got to all the questions. That's awesome. Anyway, so state of MDM. The state of MDM, folks, is strong. There are ongoing digital transformations. There are ERP consolidations. There are investments in AI that are putting wind in the MDM sales. What else did I call out here? There's the growth of the CDO role. My goodness, this year, or I should say last year, went to the CDO IQ conference. It's really only the conference that I know that is that big and is focused only on CDOs. Blown away by how many brand new CDOs there are, particularly in government sector. Every one of those people, as their number one or number two priority, will have a governance mandate. Every one of them. It's either number one priority is either going to be solve data governance or define a data strategy. Should be data strategy starting first, of course, we agree. But that's number one or number two. Get governance right. And as a part of that, MDM is a big focus, rightfully so. Because I would argue, as a natural way to prioritize your efforts, start with the data that matters the most, master data. So when a lot of these new CDOs are trying to get their hands around governance and solving for governance, a great place to look is MDM. So yes, growth of CDOs is another. SaaS adoption is another. Growth of the cloud is another. companies are still investing in moving to the cloud, believe it or not. There's a lot of companies that are just still now just starting cloud migrations, believe it or not. Widespread adoption of SaaS is making it easier to implement MDM. We're seeing implementation times to stand up analytical forms of MDM like 12 weeks. No problem, right? To break a couple silos. You're not going to break every silo in 12 weeks, but you can break 2 or 3 silos in 12 weeks. SaaS, cloud migrations, focus on analytical MDM. A lot of competition in the MDM market. This is growing the MDM market. I was blown away this year by how many people came up to me when I was at the 12 industry events that I attended. They said, hey, I'm new to MDM. I'm just getting into the game. We need some help. Like after 20 years of doing this, I thought, okay, there's nobody going to be talking about doing MDM for the first time. I'd assumed that we had kind of tapped the market. Totally untrue. It is a growing market. So those are all really, really good things. The state of MDM is very, very strong. There are a lot of reasons to be excited and optimistic about it. There are some macro forces that are a little concerning. There have been some layoffs in tech. I would argue that is very much a delayed reaction to overhiring in 2021 to 2022 when money was basically free and interest rates were incredibly low, at least at the beginning of 2022. And I think that there's some right sizing going on. Don't get me wrong. My heart goes out to anybody affected by downsizing. I've been downsized. It's no fun. I get it. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. At a high level, I think that in the next 2 to 3 months, things will kind of calm out when it comes to downsizing in the tech sector. But I still think that there's a lot of money there. Retained corporate earnings are higher than they ever been. A lot of the inflation, sadly, that we've been experiencing is a lot of companies have just been price gouging. And there is a lot of money sitting in the coffers of big corporations out there, and they are investing in infrastructure to make them more impervious to those disruptions that I was talking about earlier before. So I think the state of MDM is very, very strong. Desi, what metrics or indicators do you recommend for measuring the return on investments of MDM initiatives in an insurance startup environment? I need to think about that. Is my picture blurry? Dislike this platform. If I'm coming across blurry, I don't know why. My apologies. Hopefully not. My bandwidth is good. Maybe for my camera. I don't know. Oh, geesh. Desi, ROI. Great question. So insurance startup, that's a tricky one. Not the ROI can be tricky. We could certainly talk about that. I think that's a great topic to just focus on one of these monthly episodes. You know, when it comes to insurance, a lot of the insurance providers I've been working with over the last few years, it's coming back to single source of the truth, but being able to understand risk and quantify risk and mitigate risk, particularly when it comes to understanding who parties are to a claim. Where in a lot of insurance companies that I've worked with in the past, where policy management, claims management systems don't actually talk. It's like crazy, but they don't actually talk. So you can have a party to a claim like multiple times over, where there could be even somebody doing claims fraud, but you don't really know that on the policy management side because Joe Smith and Joseph Smith are not even connected. You don't have a single view of party. I would hope that if you're in a startup for insurance, that maybe you solve from that from an infrastructure perspective, and you don't have these highly brittle, highly siloed environment where your policy management system and your claims management system don't talk. But maybe they don't. I don't know. But in like the big insurance companies, widespread problems. So from an ROI perspective, a lot of the business case here was really kind of tied to better policy management, better relationships with our policyholders and understanding who the policyholders are, a lot of ROI around fraud reduction, a lot of ROI around claim speed, the speed to process claims, right? Because if you were having every claim be reviewed to make sure that you know who these people are, if they're actually, you know, are they legit people, having a good understanding of who your various parties are, whether they're a policyholder or not a policyholder, but having the single, accurate, consistent, verified view of people, being able to process claims quicker. These are all examples of ROI, of having a better ROI, optimized business processes through MDM, where you have a single source of truth for parties. Maybe that party is a corporate entity. Maybe that party is somebody who works at a corporate entity who is managing their claims. So the list of potential use cases here is very long, but that was just a handful that I've worked with in insurance companies over the last few years. Hopefully that answers the question. But there's a lot. And it may vary. Maybe you're more focused on marine. Maybe you're more focused on casualty. Maybe you're reinsurance. We could drill down into individual use cases. But ultimately, for a lot of insurance companies, it really comes down to understanding who are we doing business with, or who is a party to a claim that we're supporting or underwriting, and how do we optimize that, and how do we drive down the risk? Hope that answers the question. Just making sure we got all the questions answered. Looks like it. Well, in our last few minutes, where are things going? What's kind of the state when it comes to how data is being managed? Trends. Well, there's a few other trends that I see that I think are really kind of positive. One is, and I know we're not supposed to focus on technology. We're not. People, process, and technology, not just about technology. I'm really excited about AI and about the intersection of MDM and AI. I'm going to talk about that at an upcoming Gartner conference. I'm going to be talking about that. I'm going on the road because I basically live on the road. We're planning to probably have 7 or 8 cities where I visit in the next few months, talking about how to leverage MDM and enable AI through MDM. So I'm bullish on AI. I'm very bullish on the data fabric. I just am. I think it makes complete and total sense. The data fabric is the underpinning of this kind of evolving data and analytics governance platform. That's something I think is really, really, really interesting, where you basically have this hyper virtualized layer of data, where on top of that, you could have advanced MDM, more advanced forms of semantic layers, where you could have situations where we start to move towards more and more and more automation of data management processes, where you could actually have AI and ML helping inform a lot of your business rules by looking at and managing and analyzing a lot of transactional data and a lot of metadata. That's the data fabric. I'm really bullish on that. I like the idea of data products. I like the idea of data product management mostly. Data products, I'm going to do an episode of the podcast probably in a couple of weeks. I just recorded one last week with Pietijn Strenghold, who wrote a book called Data Management at Scale. He's the CDO of Microsoft Netherlands. Super, super smart guy. He's got a very specific view of the world when it comes to data products. It tends to be more of where he views data products as more of a raw material that are being consumed in analytics, that are being consumed in operational systems, being consumed in downstream systems. I view data products as more finished products. I think master data records, right? A gold master customer record is a great data product because it is verified, it's trustworthy, it's been curated. It could be exposed in a data catalog, right? So I actually think MDM and data products play very well together, because it's easy to say that master record is a data product, and you can publish it in a data catalog and it's ready to go. It's consumable, it's verifiable, it's ready to go. So if you're interested in tinkering with data products and maybe hiring a product manager to manage the creation of those data products, I think MDM is a wonderful place to start. So I think that that's another thing that kind of puts wind in the MDM sails. I talked about a lot of the other things that I'm really kind of bullish on when it comes to MDM. Any last questions in our final 2 minutes? It's so awesome to have a lot of people show up today. It's great. Oh, Melanie, I hope I answered your question. I know I went a little bit of a rant about ownership. I mean, part of the ongoing challenge for MDM practitioners, and this is true of all data management practitioners, by the way. This is true of people who do data quality. This is true of people who do analytics. Arguably, this is even true of people who do AI, which is kind of sad. We really, really struggle to articulate our value. The things that I was talking about earlier around the insurance use cases, but there's a zillion use cases out there. I think that if we can articulate our value somehow, some way, and what I mean here is business value, like not better data, right? Like not the elimination of null fields or a successfully matched record or an integration that ran or a pipeline that ran successfully. Business people don't care about that stuff. They care about more revenue, lower costs, less risk. If we can articulate our value somehow that way, I think there'll be less of this between, IT and the business. I think the business will say, hey, we want more. Give it to us, right? And they'll be less likely to push back on things like governance and participation in governance committees and ownership of data. So, all roads lead to value, all roads lead to ROI. And the more we can do that and the better we can articulate that, I think we eliminate some of the friction points that we've historically experienced. And that's especially the case with MDM, especially the case. All right, Dean, 100% agree with your MDM as data products. Yeah, me too. Thank you. Awesome. If you got questions, reach out online. Reach out, Dean, through LinkedIn. I'm happy to jump on it a little bit more. Submit, thank you. We are out of time, but let me make sure. You can tell the name of the book by Microsoft CDO Netherlands, Data Management at Scale. That's the book, Data Management at Scale. His name is Pietijn Strenghold. It's a Dutch name, but if you just search, it's an O'Reilly book. So it's like all the O'Reilly books. It's got a lizard on the cover, or just like, or a bird, or like just one. It's a white O'Reilly. It's just, yeah, you'll find it. Data Management at Scale, published by O'Reilly. Oh, there you go. Thanks, Dean. That's helpful. Yeah, I think that's his Substack. It's his Medium. Same thing. Anyway, I need to run, guys. Thank you so much for attending this episode of CDO Matters Live. I hope I kind of touched high level on the state of MDM. Look for a white paper, maybe a series of blogs. I don't know how we're going to carve it up, but there's a lot of text. Look for a white paper shortly. It'll be available from Profisee.com that you can share internally, talking about why MDM matters and what the state of the affairs is in the MDM market. Otherwise, I will look to see you maybe on an episode of the podcast coming up, or maybe in another month in another one of these live events. I hope you can join me then. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day. I will hopefully see you in another month. Thanks all.